In 2013, Hoosiers lost a beloved statesman as longtime Indiana Congressman Andy Jacobs Jr. died at the age of 81. Andy was a strong supporter of libraries, and we were very fortunate over the years to speak with Andy to promote his various library programs as well as feature the many books that he wrote. We hope you enjoy this retrospective as the Indianapolis Public Library remembers Andy Jacobs Jr. Well, let's get right into your book, The 1600 Killers, which discusses the politics of war among 7 U.S. presidents. Now, in your book, what view do you share about those presidents?
I like all of them, one not very much. That's the diplomatic way in Congress of saying you didn't like him at all. Democrat and Republican alike, I was very fond of them, so I don't mean to imply any dislike for them, but I detest their unconstitutional wars. I suppose the best known lawyer in the history of the United States would be Abraham Lincoln. He wrote to his law partner, William Herndon, while Mr. Lincoln was a representative in the Congress, that Herndon's view that the president had the authority to start wars for the United States was in error. Article 1, Section A, Clause 11 of the Constitution says what every school kid knows: Congress shall have the power to declare war. In recent years, beginning with Harry Truman, in modern times anyway, that provision has been repealed, you might say, by PR, by public relations. They have taken the term in the second article, the president shall be the commander-in-chief, and they have buzzed that up into a complete repeal of the specific language of the first article. Now, I say in the book that to argue that the term commander-in-chief confers on the president the authority to decide when and where and if we go to war is as logical as to argue that the term or the title chief of police gives that official the authority to enact criminal law. It does not. And the only thing it means in both cases is that those officers are there to execute the policies adopted by the legislative branch and the governor in the case of criminal law. But in the case of a declaration of war, the founders gave the president no part at all. That is one thing the Congress passes that does not involve a presidential signature. And Lincoln went on to say to Herndon, the reason, as I understand it, that our founders placed that provision in the convention, by which he meant the Constitution, was that they had seen monarchs in Europe for centuries committing their countries to foreign wars and daring the Parliament not to support our brave men at the front. And he said, your position places our president where kings have always stood. The president can make war at pleasure. And the president might say to the Congress, I see cause for war with Canada. And you, as a congressperson, might say, I see no cause for war. And the president, under your interpretation, can say, I see it if you don't. Be silent. And that's about where we've come to with these 7 presidents. Every one of them, as I say in the book, I think, has killed our kids for points in the polls.
Slander and Sweet Judgment, memoir of an Indiana congressman. What is this book about?
All right, let's start with the title. Slander means dirty campaigning, of which we've seen too much in this country, I think. Sweet Judgment is a quotation from Robert Bolt's Man for All Season about Thomas More. Thomas More is a jurist. Someone offers him a basket of baked apples and says that my daughter has a case in the Court of Common Pleas, and More snaps back, apples, to sweeten my judgment. So the Sweet Judgment refers to money accepted by members of Congress from lobbyists, which I think should be outlawed.
What kind of reaction are you getting from these books? Any that you're noticing that you're making an impact on the process?
Well, it's mostly been positive. There were few people, because I roundly criticize presidential wars. That's why it was the 1600 Killers. That's an address in Washington. I hold, and I think that Abraham Lincoln held the same thing, that it is thoroughly unconstitutional for a president to start a war. The Constitution couldn't be more clear that Congress shall have the power to declare war. So there was some dissent about that in one review in the Indianapolis Star. Not much. It was mild dissent. It was a very positive review about the book generally. But I think as time has gone by, most people realize that that was one of the more egregious follies of American foreign policy. So it's been mostly complimentary. As far as the other is concerned, there are people who are adamantly opposed to public financing of congressional campaigns. But I think more and more the public is coming around to understand that who pays the fiddler calls the tune. And I make the point in the book that does anybody believe at this late date of scientific knowledge that the United States government would be subsidizing the tobacco industry if there weren't two kinds of cigarette packs, one with 20 chances on cancer and the other contribution of $10,000 per cycle to people who run for Congress. You could not get votes in Congress to subsidize that nefarious weed if that were not the case. So if you had public financing of campaigns, the people would come closer, I think, to calling the tune.
Congressman, what makes Abraham Lincoln such a favorite president of Americans?
Good question. The first thing I think people ought to consider is that picking great presidents is a little like the Academy Awards. There are categories. For example, John Adams and Dwight Eisenhower, in my opinion, they get Oscars for peacemakers, for avoiding unnecessary war, which more than you say for a lot of presidents. On the other hand, Lincoln, of course, is completely off the chart. He had no choice. He was a war president, but he was a peaceful war president, and his utterances and his policies, malice toward none, and so on. But I think ultimately the reason that Jefferson and Lincoln are remembered so well and revered so greatly, whereas Madison and Adams probably had a lot more to do with constructing our republic than Jefferson, for example, is because Madison and Adams were rather staid personalities. Jefferson and Lincoln were poets. And whether it's Johnny Carson or Abraham Lincoln, someone who is pleasant to hear is going to go down in history as a great, great person. Lincoln deserves it, and I suppose Jefferson did also because of his poetic talents. But as far as getting down and really digging in and putting this Constitution together and putting this revolution together, the other two guys in some ways exceeded. But we love Abraham Lincoln because there's no end to his funny stories and funny stories about him, his dignity, his commanding presence. He's off the charts. When you start comparing presidents, set Lincoln aside.
And during this program, Remembering Lincoln on February 21st, you'll be one of the main presenters. Will this indeed be one of the themes of your presentation, why Lincoln was so beloved?
I have to wait until a given day to find out what my theme is.
Okay. As part of the One Book, One City campaign, the Glendale branch played host to a special program remembering the life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln. Moderated by the president of the Lincoln Association of Indiana, Angela Gilmer, the program featured an address by former Congressman Andy Jacobs, Jr., who serves on the National Bicentennial Board for the Lincoln Birthday Celebration in 2009. Jacobs recited the words of poet Carl Sandburg upon the occasion of Lincoln's death.
Not often in the history of humankind does a man arrive on earth who is both steel and velvet, who is hard as rock and soft as drifting fog. Here and there across the centuries come the reports of such people. But in the year 1809, February 12th, the incomparable Abraham Lincoln was, if not an exact example, an approximation of such a person. In the time of the April lax 1865, on his death, the body was carried north and west 1,000 miles, and the American people wept as never before. The bells sobbed, cities wore crepe, the burial train passing through the major cities of the North, ending its journey in Springfield, Illinois.
the hometown.
The Lincoln program included costumed characterizations of individuals of the 1860s, including 2 Union soldiers, Hoosier poet James Whitcomb Riley, Reverend Samuel P. Strong, and Sarah Elizabeth Covey, a seamstress and wife of Freetown Village founder Isaiah Covey. Highlighting these presentations was an appeal to the audience by Lincoln assassination conspirator Mary Surratt.
If Mr. Lincoln was such a tender-hearted man, why didn't he just let the South have a country of their own and save 600,000 men from dying?
The large crowd in the Glendale Branch Auditorium also interacted with noted Civil War author Alan Nolan and Lincoln Association spokesman Chuck Hubert, who answered questions surrounding Lincoln's life and death. You can learn more about the life and legacy of Andy Jacobs Jr. by visiting a memorial website maintained by his sons, Andy and Stephen, at andyjacobsjr.com.